This is the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast, your source for the strategies, systems, and insights you need to turn your dreams into your destiny. Every week, we dive into dynamic conversations as our host, Nicole Greer, interviews leadership and business experts. They're here to shed light on practical solutions to the challenges of personal and professional development. Now, here's your host, a professional speaker, coach, and consultant, Nicole Greer.
Welcome, everybody, to the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. My name is Nicole Greer. They call me the Vibrant Coach, and I have another vibrant, amazing guest on the show today, and her name is Davina. Don't you love that? Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Her mother. Way to go, Mom. Good job on the name. So we're so excited to have her on the show today, and she is the author of 3 books, but in particular, we're going to be talking about a book that she has written recently called Elevate. It's a model and it's going to help us be a better communicator. I am so glad that she is here today. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read her bio so you get to know her. Davina Stanley has been helping executives clarify and convey complex ideas for more than 25 years. And so, isn't that what you always hear about business? Everything's getting so complex. There's a lot of complexity. All right, so she's going to help us talk about it, right? She began this work at McKinsey in Hong Kong. Do you know who McKinsey is? Ginormous, ginormous, ginormous consultancy. So look that up. They got all the white papers and things over there at the McKinsey. All right, so she was in Hong Kong. We should probably find out about that. What was that like? And has helped people at all levels across most professions since then. She grew up in Australia. Wait till you hear her accent. It's so amazing. And has lived in Hong Kong, New York, Tokyo, and Seattle is where she's sitting today. So it is early 30 over there, and she lives with her amazing husband who messed up her background. But if you look at it now, she's got her chair back in place and everything is good to go. He was fishing around in her office. I wonder what for. Maybe she'll tell us. All right, welcome to the show, Dominic. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nicole. This is going to be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Tell us, first of all, what was it like to live in Hong Kong? I have wanderlust. I want to go all the places, and that's a place I've never been. What was that like?
We loved it. We moved there very young. We're in our mid-20s.
Oh,
And
my word.
yeah, I know. And at that point, I grew up on a farm in country Australia. So it took a bit of a pull to get me to leave Australia. It was a bit of a big deal. It was my
I
second trip
bet.
overseas ever when I moved to Hong Kong. And we loved it. It was such a vibrant sort of place, to use your world. It's bustling, it's incredibly busy. Of course, it's very multicultural. And we were there for 4 years that time. We've lived there twice. And in the middle of that 4 year stint, Hong Kong was handed back to China. So we were
Oh,
there
wow.
both in that colonial era and starting to see the transition to the, let's call it the Chinese era in that place. And so, look, it's just so different. The smells, the wow, I don't know how you say it without making, I don't know how to make it into word pictures, but there's a lot that goes on there. It's very busy, very bustling, and really, really fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Ah, that's on the bucket list. But more importantly, let's talk about your book, Elevate. It's how to lift the quality of thinking on your team's board papers without rewriting them yourself. Now, first of all, before we started the podcast, I asked you, what do you mean by board paper? So we just have a little definition, a vocabulary thing. Let's talk about what you mean by board papers.
Absolutely. So whenever there's a meeting of a board, and the work I do focuses on any form of senior decision-making group, but boards, usually a paper or a report or a PowerPoint presentation is delivered. And very often that's given to the leadership group before the meeting so they can read it and get across the ideas, and they can spend some time reflecting on how they might contribute to make that area of the business better, or ask some really good questions to those of you who are presenting. So in Australia, we call them papers. I think in America, the term a bit more commonly used is board reports or board presentations.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So we've got an executive team and they are trying to spend their resources wisely. And so I am on a team that's working on a project or an idea or an initiative, and I need to put together messaging that is fantastic so I can either sell my idea or update people on the successes I'm having, or maybe advocate for help me make this work. So there's a couple of different ways that we go about it that we might need help from this executive team. So tell us a little bit about how you approach this work. How do we communicate with the C-suite?
So, with great clarity and insight at the very simplest of levels, okay? But,
Yes.
you
Okay,
know,
everybody get clear on what
get
you want to
clear.
say.
Exactly. And look, clarity is the baseline level. When I open up that communication, can I find the message really quickly, like within seconds? Can I find the main thing? But then when I find it, is it useful? Is it insightful? Is it interesting? So I think of three dimensions: clarity of message, you can find it; quality of insight, it's useful, it's interesting; and then finally, velocity. Velocity in relation to how quickly can a team prepare something high quality? How quickly can that audience understand the messaging so they don't need to use all their brain power to work it out? And then how quickly can action happen? Because ultimately, it's all about getting some sort of action. So, clarity, quality, and velocity are the things that I think about in this space.
All right, fantastic. So I am pitching something. Let's say I want to sell an idea to the board. How would I go about making sure I have clarity, quality, and velocity? Take
Great
me through the
question.
process.
Yeah, great question. This tends to be collaborative. It's very rare for somebody to do it on their own individually. So I like to think about how the people involved collaborate together. So there's a role for the leader at the very beginning, and you put it beautifully just before. What do I need from the board? So I think leaders need to help the people who are drafting these papers or reports to understand with crystal clarity what is the very best outcome we can get from this very specific engagement conversation with this group so that we can get the outcome we need. So working that out very early on helps such a lot. And then I have patterns to help people go, oh, now we know what we need. Well, we could use one of these. Which one of those feels right? Pick that one, done. And then mock that up as a skeleton with their story, iterate with that quickly so it doesn't get stuck in the leader's inbox. When people draft big reports, it's often hard to read. So a leader will get the draft for review and think, oh, I need to spend a good bit of energy on this. And I'm back to back in meetings. I haven't got time yet. I've got some time. It's not due yet. I'll leave it until I can do it justice because I really want to do it justice. The problem with that is that it means everybody gets delayed, and very often the leader wedges themselves in a bit of a corner because, oh, I've got to get that to the company secretary tomorrow. Oh, I haven't looked at it yet. Right, tonight or at the weekend, I've got to do it. And they end up reworking it themselves. So having a very clear way of mapping the messaging early means the team can, or the leader can give feedback very quickly and they can crystallize that really high quality messaging together. And once that's done, preparing the document's easy. Presenting it becomes a lot easier too, because there's been a lot of investment in the thinking behind it, the strategy behind that messaging. So it's really about front ending the thinking.
Okay, all right. And you said that you have some patterns or templates that people can use. So can you work us through maybe one of
Mm,
those or maybe several of the patterns and
mhm.
templates that people can use to get this front ending process done as we're trying to get this in front of the leader and get them to give us a yes or consideration?
Absolutely. So let me think of I'm going to share my favorite. So I'll give a teeny bit of background to where the foundations of these come from, and then I'll give you one, which is my favorite one. So the techniques that I use come from McKinsey. There's a technique called the pyramid principle, and it was set up at McKinsey in the 1960s. It's ubiquitous in consulting. So I imagine a lot of people who are listening would be familiar with it. So I was approved by Barbara Minto to teach it, and that's the discipline, structured thinking discipline that I use for everything. And there's two ways within that of organizing the ideas within a story. And my favorite story is actually what's called a deductive story. It has 3 parts at the top line. I call it golden, and I love it because it's such a positive story. So the first part is to set up the opportunity. We have a wonderful opportunity to accelerate, to get more customers, to do something exciting. And here's the best way to capture that opportunity. So you persuade them first that this opportunity is really attractive. And then once they're persuaded, you say, okay, now here's how we're going to tackle that. Here's how we're going to capture it. And you make your case for your method. It might be that you evaluate some options. It might be that you just pitch your thing really firmly. So that's those first 2 pieces together build the case. And then once they're fully persuaded that this opportunity is awesome and this solution is the right thing, you say, great, let me tell you how we're going to do that. And you give them the plan. And I love it because it's positive. It's such an easy sell. It's such an easy sell. There's another one that I also love, which is the other kind of structure. I call it a grouping. Some people might be familiar with another word, which is inductive. So when you've got your project and it's going really well, and you want to say, look, everything is good here. This is not a watermelon. It's not green on the outside and red in the middle. It really is absolutely green, everywhere green. You say, look, everything's great. Why is that true? And you list a series of reasons. And you can structure that in a number of different ways. It might be by tasks. This task is going really well. That task is going really well. That task is going really well. Or that deliverable. I prefer to think about what you've delivered rather than what you've done. There's all sorts of ways you could do that. But that's also a very positive story. Of course, there are more challenging and difficult stories that you have to tell too, but they're just 2 of my favorites.
All right. So the first one, you call it deductive or golden,
Golden is the
right?
form of deductive, yeah. The golden
Yeah.
opportunity, yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. And when people bring this to the leadership, they're going to
Hmm.
tell them the opportunity, how we are going to capture it, and what is the plan. Is there
Hmm.
more structure that you teach within that? Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people have great ideas,
Mm.
and it's just like, how do I get that great
Mm.
idea
Mm.
across? How do
Mm.
I get it in there? So we've got the outline, the structure of it, but do you have maybe tips, tricks, techniques for actually putting that all together?
Absolutely. So the beauty of this method is that it uses structure to help us work out what our messaging is. So when we lay our ideas out, and I like to do it visually on a one pager, it pushes, and doing that pushes us to get out of the weeds. This is why I focus on the visual, and I try also to get people out of track changes until much later in the process. So you think about, how do I map this on a page with those 3 sections? A really short introduction, one big idea, then you've got your 3 sections, and then under that you're going to have detail. And then how do you structure the detail? How do you, for example, let's focus on the opportunity. So we have an opportunity to, I'm thinking of a concrete example that's in one of my books. So we have an opportunity to implement a new digital tool that will help us capture a lot more sales from our clients who are already in store. And the message, the opportunity there was such an easy sell because it was, we have an opportunity to make a whole lot more, get a whole lot more value from an existing tool that we have. And then you say, oh, okay, why is that true? And underneath that, you list 2 to 5 reasons why. And now, if you have a lot of information there, the trick is to structure it really well so that you can give the high level and decide then how deep you want to go, how deep you need to go. I don't want to try and remember the reasons for that particular case because I might muck it up, but you have this idea and then backed up by 2 to 5 reasons why it's a cracking good idea. And then the next one, and rolling, going beyond, expanding. In that case, it was something like expanding the pilot across the whole business over the next 2 months is the right way, the best way to implement that. Why is that true? Well, it's really easy to implement. Again, you're going into reasons why that's true. We've got the infrastructure already in place. We can develop the campaigns to go with it really quickly. There's minimal training needed for the team, for example, those sorts of reasons. The risks of doing this, of course, risks are really key. The risks of doing this are minimal. So you're building up each one of those. In those two sections, it's all about reasoning. So you want reasons, and you've got to be really consistent with only reasons in those sections and not get away from yourself around the plans because you hold that back to the end. So making sure that everything's very neat. It's a bit like Marie Kondo for your thinking. Marie
Ooh.
Kondo, don't you?
Oh, I do. I gotta get organized. I gotta watch all those episodes again. She's so good. She's
I
so
know.
zen.
She changed the way I
Yeah.
pack my suitcases.
There you and that says it all. Because did you hear all the places she's been and all the stuff she's done? That's fantastic. Yeah. So really what I'm hearing you say is that maybe we're putting these ideas in front of our leaders before we figured out the why. And that's why they say no. No, we
Sometimes
can't do
that.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes.
And what else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why they say no. And sometimes they don't say no. They say, can you give me more? Or they come at you with questions that take you down rabbit holes. They might disagree with, even if you tell them why, they might disagree with you. And that's okay. Have the discussion.
Right.
That's good.
Sure.
But yes, the why is really important. And I actually find that the why is sometimes the hardest thing for people to convey because they're so convinced and often, when you're working within a discipline, like you're an HR specialist or you are a technology specialist, it seems obvious to you, but these decision making groups are multidisciplinary. So none of them are experts in every discipline. So the why really, really matters.
Oh, did you hear what she just said? I don't want to slip right past that. Excuse me, Davina. But she just said, you're sitting there in the HR seat, you're sitting there in the IT seat, you're sitting there in the manufacturing powder coating seat, whatever your seat is, and you think they should know. They don't know. They don't know.
And they work from first principles, don't they? They have to. How does this affect the strategy? What are the returns? Is this feasible, practical? Can we really implement it in our situation? And are the risks right? And have these people really thought about this properly? So they're thinking about it from a helicopter view because they've got that broad whole of company, whole of strategy lens. And of course, every decision making group has that, but their territory is a little narrower further down. So the same principles apply at every level. It's just that their visibility and their view is different. When you go
Yeah.
in, you asked about why do they say no? I think sometimes it's because they just don't understand what you're saying. And so one of my clients, this is my favorite story, where I worked
Oh,
with a
tell it to me.
company, I worked with the CEO, the C-suite, and then a couple of hundred people below. And one of the board directors are on multiple companies. And so she fed to another board and said, oh, I really want you to get Davina in to help. And the reason why she did that was she said, it takes me 10% now of the time it used to take to read the papers and not just read them, but understand them. So I can use my mental energy to actually think, oh, that's an interesting idea. What do I think of that? What do I do with that? How can I help them make that even better? Rather than, oh, what are they really trying to say here? What questions have I got to ask to really understand this complex new, let's say, AI thing that this team wants to put forward? How do I know that this really is not just generally a good idea, but right for us right now? I don't really understand it. So making it so easy to understand, it seems sort of basic, but actually that's a very big part of the game.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sitting here thinking about just even like languages, right? Like you need to translate
Yes,
what you're trying to say out of your HREs, your ITEs over here into
yes,
plain language that somebody with incredible business acumen, can understand. And then I think I'm just kind of landing right there too, Davina, is we both need to draw it back to the things that you said. And you said them so quickly, I didn't catch them all. You said, does this fit the strategy? Does this get us a return on investment? Are we going to mitigate a risk or are we going to create a risk? What are we doing with risk? And so maybe framing whatever we're presenting around those things. Can you list that list
Yeah,
again for
yeah,
me?
absolutely. No, you got
Okay.
three of them beautifully. Is it right for this? Is this strategically sensible? Will it give
Right.
us returns? And returns can be financial, but in some other places, they can be like a social return, or if you think government sort of work, their remit is a little broader than just financial. So, or
Right, or
not for
employee
profit.
engagement, something like
Correct.
that.
Yeah, yeah. So the
Yeah,
return can be all sorts of things. Then practicality, feasibility. Can we actually do it at all, or the way you've suggested? You know, is it practical? And then finally, risks. And you've always, of course, got to cover off on the risks, because the more you show that you've thought about them, it's counterintuitive, I think. If you write down all the things that really genuinely do keep you awake at night and you counter them with what you're going to do to address it, your audience has so much more confidence in you, because as one board director said to me, I've got to have a really long nose and super short fingers. I'm not allowed to meddle. Of course, they want to sometimes, but they're not allowed to meddle. But they must have a very good nose, an instinct for, is someone trying to pull the wool over my eyes here, wittingly or otherwise? Have they really thought about this? Is there something I'm missing here? Have I seen this movie before? Was it a horror film? Or was it a romance that had a really happy ending?
That's
What
right,
was
where they
it?
climbed the mountain and planted the flag, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. And have they really thought about this? So it's actually, like I say, counterintuitive, because you don't necessarily want to do that. But it shows a bit of bravery, but it shows also that you've really thought.
Yeah, I love it.
Are you ready to build your vibrant culture? Bring Nicole Greer to speak to your leadership team, conference, or organization to help them with their strategies, systems, and smarts to increase clarity, accountability, energy, and results. Your organization will get lit from within. Email her at nicole@vibrantculture.com, and be sure to check out Nicole's TEDx talk at vibrantculture.com.
I watched you give like a webinar prior to this and of course checked you out and everything and you've got all your books. Go over to the Amazon, everybody. Davina Stanley, get all the books. But you talked in the webinar about having good meetings too. We when we're thinking about I'm pitching an idea, that might be a special meeting, but you also talked in that webinar about how to have a better meeting. And one thing you said is if you don't, you might want to write this down. Everybody write this down. Get a pen. Write this down. Okay, here we go. If you don't need to have the meeting, don't have the meeting. Okay, so I'm gonna let you talk about that for a
Yeah,
hot second, but that's a good tip. If everything's status quo, don't meet.
exactly. And I think I had this conversation with a leader reasonably recently. And I said, look, you're having like all day leadership meetings every week, which creates a lot of work for the team. And
Hmm.
what if you said to people that if everything's going really well to plan, and that's consistently so, or just happily this time, you don't need to meet. Give me the one pager that provides the evidence so I can be true. Just make it a paper for noting, and you actually earn a heck of a lot of kudos back from your leadership team, right? So long as you're genuinely proving to them and they can read and say, oh, good, it really is on track. Everything really is good here. You actually win a lot of credits. I think that people become afraid that doing that means they don't get the face time with the leadership group, which is very important. So you don't want to go for a year and never meeting them. Sure, absolutely, you don't, because you do want
Right.
that relationship. But it would be unusual, I think, to have a project that didn't need any engagement, genuine engagement from a leadership group for a substantial period of time. You want to celebrate something particular, take the time, go tell them. Take 5 minutes though, don't take half an hour if you don't need it. Hey, we just want to tell you we've been able to accelerate because of some wonderful thing that these set of stars that align. So we're going to deliver early, or we're going to deliver under budget. Whatever the good news is, do go and take 5 minutes and tell them. But I think we overestimate the value of jamming the leadership meeting time when we really don't have anything valuable to say, because they're there to help, they're there to guide, they're there to add value, as are you. Think, is this a really good investment of everybody's time? These are really expensive meetings, really expensive
Yeah. And
meetings.
so explain that for a moment so people can just understand who's sitting in the meeting, what's not getting done, right?
Yeah, exactly. The higher you go up in an organization, the more value you should be delivering, because you have a broader scope, a broader remit. And so if you have half an hour free, let's say, there's a heck of a lot you can do with that. And senior people struggle to find thinking time. And everybody does, but it's particularly important the higher up you go. My friend and colleague has written a wonderful book called Making Time for Strategy. And it's so critical that you do that. So that's the gift that you're giving them. You're giving them the opportunity to take time to think, oh, how could I improve? And look, I know you speak to a lot of HR people. So how could I improve the HR strategy? How could I improve our retention? Which is such an important thing. How could I improve the quality of the culture in our organization? What could I do with that half an hour of even just going for a walk and thinking, right? So much of our
That's
thinking,
right.
good thinking, value adding thinking happens then. So I just think it's so important for those people not to be jammed all day, every day in meetings, especially when it's, well, okay, that's nice to know. Bye.
And I just have to think that if the leader gets the email that says, we don't think we need to meet, everything's on track. And then I think your advice is tell them why,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like it's on track because this number was hit and this person was hired and that thing happened and this thing happened. So we think the plan that we pitched originally is on track, right? And what does a senior leader think of a leader maybe further down in the organization who is hitting their numbers, making their proposals rock and roll, and making their projects work, and giving back time to leaders? You're going to be a hero.
Exactly.
You're going to be a hero.
Exactly.
They're
Yes.
like, man, when we need to promote somebody, let's promote him. Let's
Yeah.
promote her,
Yeah.
right?
And
Because
it's
you're going to be
trust,
seen.
you know,
Yeah, oh,
speaks to trust.
absolutely. 100% it does. Okay, so that was the first thing. Don't have a meeting, okay, if you don't need one, and then send the paper, as you like to call it, or the report, as we like to call it, that says, here, we don't need to meet. Here's where we are. Here's the update. Here's the why. All right. But then let's say we do need to meet. So, what are your ideas? Because everybody is like, I'm meeting to death. How do we handle and do better meetings? A lot of the meetings that I observe, it's just kind of like, what's your department doing? We're good. What's your department doing? We're good.
Okay.
There's not a lot of really great activity or the
Mm,
velocity that you were
mm,
talking about
mm.
before. So, will you talk a little bit about the
Yeah.
meetings? How do we
Yeah.
up our meeting game?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, decide what you want from them. What do you want from that meeting? Do you need a decision? Do you need input? Do you need what? Do you just need trust? Is that really the outcome that you need? So I think that's, first of all, be really pointy about the outcome you need. And number two
Okay.
is that know your culture, and hopefully, if there is pre-reading, then people have read it. If there's not, then you've got to decide how to handle. Yeah, I know. I see your face. This brings in the Amazon method, doesn't it? Because there's so much good stuff about what Jeff Bezos said about short communication. I think it's like a third of the meeting they spend reading, and which must be really nerve-wracking for the author who's also in the room, I have to say. But that I love the pragmatism around that. Most companies don't have that. They get a mix. You get a mix of people, which is actually very difficult to navigate. I think it's much easier to have everyone read it or no one read it. I think. But anyway, so
I would agree. I would totally agree.
yeah,
Because the whole thing about reading is the old adage, like we got to get everybody on the same.
yes. And it's
Yes.
faster to read than it is to speak. So if you think of velocity, it's much faster to read something than to talk it through. And the good news about talking through your presentation is you can paper over the cracks of your logic with your charisma. The bad news is you paper over the cracks of the logic with your charisma. So it's a very risky thing. Okay. How do you deal with this? Probably you have to present, but structure your messaging so your audience can get it in a heartbeat. Have a super short introduction that lands the topic, that leads them directly towards one message, that is one sentence that sums up the whole thing that you want to convey. And then summarize or synthesize the ideas below into a small number of points, 2 to 5 points. 3 is the magic number, but don't force it if it doesn't fit logically. Yeah. So have a small number of high level points that they can find really quickly, and try and present for a really short amount of time. Not because you're speaking so fast that they can't follow up and you're trying to get everything across, right? But because you've thought and structured your thinking, so you know the high level. So plan, be pointy about the outcome you want. Structure your messaging so that within a few minutes, they can get what you're saying. Then open up for discussion with questions. So think about questions that you might want them to ask. Maybe begin with, now you might like to know a bit more about blah, blah. Would that be right? Oh, yeah, great idea. And kick off the conversation. Because I think one of the things about these meetings is that you sit there on your phone because it's not relevant. You maybe sit there on your computer, which of course is terribly bad behavior, but it seems to happen a lot.
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you a story when you
Yeah,
get
go on.
done. I went to go do training with a leadership team, and they're all filing in the room. I've got all of my things all over the room. Like it's going to be an exciting day of training. People walk in, they're like, "What's that? What's that? What's that?"
Mm-hmm.
And they just all walk in, flip up their laptops, plug them in, and they're like, "We're going to have to work during this meeting." And I looked at the senior leader and I said, "Is that true? We're going to work while we're having training?" He's like, "Oh, no, put your laptops away." I
Exactly.
mean,
And
people have a big blind spot around this. You cannot do two things at one time. That's called multitasking. It's a myth. You stop doing this and you start doing that. So you're missing every
correct.
25th through 30th
You're
sentence
not
she's
getting
saying, I think.
anything. No, you're not getting anything. And I think but I think the reality is there's such a lack of clarity around these meetings, and
Oh, I
people
agree.
are trying to juggle for very good reason. And, oh, this topic isn't for me, so I'll, type away, which I'm
Right. And if
very
they're
sympathetic
remote,
to. Yeah. But anyway, there's a whole bigger discussion around that. I think we
yes.
can reduce the number of meetings that people need to attend if we get much more strategic about how we use the time in those meetings. And think emails, think all forms of communication. People, when I run coaching sessions, my clients will sometimes come to me and say, oh, I've got to do a deck. I've got to do a PowerPoint. I say, oh, okay, all right. So let's just go back to the beginning and think, so why? Tell me a bit about that. What is it you need to say? Who to? Just help me get in the zone. So what outcome you're going to need from specifically who's going to be in that meeting? What outcome do you really need? And we get into it, and it's not an extraordinary thing for them to say, oh, I don't actually need a deck. I just thought I do because that's what we always do. So, right. So
Right. We're deck people. That's
we're
right.
deck people. Yes. It's like, wow, how about we
We
save
deck
some
it up,
time for
man.
that? Let's have a conversation. Maybe a 5-minute phone call with one person would do. Yeah, I think
That's
that's all I
right.
need. Right. So what are we going to do right now? Let's think about that. How can we help that project materially help? And I
Yeah.
think people just get on this hamster wheel. I've got to do a deck. I've got to do an email and copy everybody, FYI. Stop. Don't. Another client said to me, she said, oh, I don't have evidence for this, but I feel like there's fewer silly emails around. I think the ones that I receive now, more of them actually matter to me, you know? And so if we can just bring that busyness, that hyper feeling down, we're all so much more productive, so much faster.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you said was so good. You said, "What I need to be pointy." She says this thing, "You got to be pointy." I love that. I'm going to steal that from you. And she said, "What is the outcome I want to get from this meeting and when it's my turn to speak?" Because the other thing, Davina, is you're required to be at this meeting. We need to we need to, okay, buy Davina's books for your leader, where she, and then have him watch the thing where she said, don't have a meeting if you don't need to have a meeting. And maybe only invite the important people, maybe just pick up the phone and make a phone call, all that stuff. But you said be pointy, decide before the meeting, even if you have to go and you're not sure why. I think it's like an attitude too. Like you said, that doesn't involve me. But what blows my mind is people do think that, and it may be true they're not involved in that particular area of the company deeply, but it's your company. It's your company, and we hired you for your brain. So could you listen, and could you just help us maybe see from an outsider's point of view? So I love what you said. You said, "Do I want their input?"
Yeah.
And I think that's really a big missing thing. Like, I might be in finance and you guys are talking about accounts receivable and I'm in marketing. Those two are interconnected in some way. I love
Hmm.
that. Yeah.
And I think too, one of the fun things with what I teach is helping people collaborate around their messaging. And I run training programs where people learn, usually online, step by step. And then we come together to do something very specifically in a small group. And very often, because of the nature of the group, we've got people from the same company or even the same division, but who do very different things. And so we
Yes, of course.
bring them together and say, right, we're going to help Mary with this particular thing. Let's all do it as a way of learning together and ask questions and see it all come together. And the questions that come from Fred, who's in a totally different area, or Joanne, who's again in a different area, are wonderful because they see things with such fresh eyes. It's much easier to get out of the weeds when you are from somewhere different. But it's also very useful to think, oh, that's what Mary does. I didn't know. Now I've got a better sense of what matters to Mary and why. I think that cross pollination can be very helpful. It's
Oh, I do
sometimes,
too.
great to be. I think of myself as the village idiot. I come in with no knowledge about the topic every single time. And all I come with is this structured thinking toolkit. And for me, most fun example of that was teaching lawyers how to get to the point within 30 seconds, right? How to write your legal advice so that the audience can understand it, the audience, the client. Law is complicated. It's not easy to do, right? But I came into that with, I'm not a lawyer. I did one subject. I did media law when I was at college, but really none. So I had to lean on structure only to be able to help people with these really complicated things. And it's actually very useful once you understand how to structure your thinking. It's like, oh, okay, I can scan that and see the problem in a heartbeat, literally in seconds. So,
Mm.
oh, the thinking's fuzzy here. Well, what's going on there?
Yeah. And don't miss this, everybody. She's number one telling you not to have a meeting if you don't need to have a meeting. Number two, she's telling you save time, save energy, save money, save yourself,
Save
have
yourself,
some structure.
especially. You know what? Doesn't it feel so much better? Doesn't work feel so much more satisfying when you're actually doing something valuable? And when your leader comes back to you with very little red pen on your communication, when you come out of a meeting with what you need, like, ha, done, awesome. It's just so much more satisfying, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You could liken it to sitting down to a table of food that you want to eat and sitting down to a table of food that you're like, I don't know if I like this.
I love
I
that.
don't-
Can I borrow
you
that?
know,
I love that.
or I don't know what's in this recipe, and I'm not sure I'm gonna taste it. So it's like where people come to the room, they're hungry, they wanna get after it and get on with the program. All
Yeah,
right, so she's
yeah.
saving you time, she's saving you energy, she's making you look smart. So again, Davina, tell us the name of your book, how we can find it, and how we can find you. I know people are like, "Help me, how do I get a hold of this gal?"
I have two books. So one is called Elevate, and that's for leaders who want to set their teams up for success with their communication. And then I have one called Engage, which is for the person on the team who needs to do the writing. So together they form, let's call it a model where you can collaborate more effectively to communicate complex ideas. And you can learn more about those at my website, which is clarityfirstprogram.com.
clarityfirstprogram.com. Did you catch that? And she's on the LinkedIn. Just go over there and put in Davina Stanley, and she will come right up. And it's an Ley. Do I have my story right on your
You
Stanley?
do.
Okay. All right. Very good. I know that my listeners are like, wait, 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 wait. One more nugget from Davina. One more nugget. What little nugget would you leave with them? How can they take action? What's something you want to share you didn't share yet?
Oh, one more thing I didn't share. I want to say stop. Before you dive in and you think your boss has asked you to write the next update, and your instinct is to get out the last one and just update it, stop and think.
Mm-mm.
What do we really need here? Otherwise, you'll bury the main thing on the bottom of page 47. Work out what the main thing is first and then start writing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that you got to use that creativity. And that's getting pointy, is it not? Getting pointy with what you want to point at. I'm pointing at this for the leader. All right, fantastic. It's been so good to have you on the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. Davina, you're a delight. Welcome to Seattle and the US. And if you come to the East Coast, come see me. Everybody, do us a favor, wherever you're listening or watching, if you're on the YouTube or you're on the Apple podcast or wherever you are, go down and just hit the like button. It takes one hot second, and leave a little love message for Davina. Tell her what you learned and how you're grateful, because listen, I learned a lot and I'm grateful. Thank you so much for being on the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Such a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more like-minded listeners. Remember, the journey to building a vibrant culture never stops. Stay inspired, keep nurturing your vibrant culture, and we can't wait to reconnect with you on the next exciting episode of Build a Vibrant Culture podcast.